Well, let's get straight into that budget then. Finance Minister MBOWENI confirming the 10.5 billion rand for South African Airways' restructuring and business rescue plan. However, MBOWENI has sent a stern warning to state-owned entities that the time for bailouts is over.
3 billion rand was allocated to the Land Bank in June. The bank will require an additional 7 billion rand over the medium term to support its restructuring and refocus. 10.5 billion rand is allocated to SAA to implement its business rescue plan. Well, let me repeat. 10.5 billion rand is allocated to SAA to implement its business rescue plan. This allocation is funded through reductions to the baselines of national departments, public entities, and conditional grants. This allocation is in addition to the 16.4 billion rand allocated over the 2020 MTF in the February budget for settling guaranteed debt and interest. You can't run away from your obligations.
Well, I was putting a bit of pressure on them earlier when I said they were the brightest ones in the room. So we're expecting to hear some explosive stuff from the both of you.
No pressure.
Joining us for this conversation, Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko, who is with the Stellenbosch Business School and Newzroom Afrika. You are an economics
contributor.
Huh?
I'm an economics contributor. I'm just the guy who's chilling at the back.
You see, I was looking for that description.
Yes.
Newzroom Afrika's economics contributor, you'd know him well. Ayabonga Cawe also gracing us with his presence. Good to see you, Aya. Let me begin with you, Nthabiseng. We've just heard about the confirmation of that 10.5 billion rand for SAA. I suppose SAA and the business rescue practitioners will be happy that it's finally a done deal. Let's look at what the minister had to go through to get that money.
So I think the important thing for us as a state is that we need to understand that there is a level of market failure that cannot be dealt with by the private sector. Any strategic asset of the state has to be looked at in that sense. I think the issue of just completely removing and negating state assets because of the governance failures isn't the right approach. I think let's fix the failures, let's fix the governance issues, but if it's a strategic asset, which I believe a national carrier is, and COVID-19 has shown us that the importance of having a national carrier is of national importance, particularly for security and moving people in and out of the country. We couldn't have hired national carriers from other countries, for an example. So I think that's number one. I think the second point that I want to raise on SAA, there must be efficient management, there must be cost recovery, there must be a sustainable business model in order to take SAA forward. This recovery that is going to come in from the medium-term budget should only be seen as that, a short-term intervention, and it shouldn't be a long-term intervention that is going to sustain SAA. SAA must on its own, stand alone, be profitable, be able to recover its costs, and ensure that this money that is invested doesn't have to be a repeat. And I think with the change in management, with the change in board, with the change in the strategic, and I know there have been 10 plans, turnaround plans and significant plans over time, but we can't give up on strategic assets because of that very issue.
In terms of saying, when I listened to what the opposition parties had to say post the minister's speech, certainly you'd be hard-pressed to find people that would agree with the sentiment, because it's not like it's the first time that SAA is receiving this bailout. In fact, they've shown that they can guzzle money, perhaps more than any other state-owned entity, barring Eskom,
Let's look at Singapore. I want to take a case in point in some of the newly industrialized countries. Decimated state-owned enterprises is not a new thing in the world. Countries have been able to recover gains from their state-owned enterprises, but also make them profitable and even venture into making them multinationals and globally competitive assets. And I think that we need to change our mindsets. reconfigure how we run the state. And I think this issue of SOEs goes into the way the state itself functions. We must change how the state functions. The measurable indicators to the success and performance of SOEs, and not just SAA, the Land Bank is also getting a bailout. Other SOEs are also in trouble right now. Denel, Prasa, Transnet. They are on a turnaround, but there must be a monitoring mechanism that's very clearly articulated in the different ministries and shareholders, but also allow the board independence to operate without political interference so that they can run, be efficient, respond to the market needs, because each and every one of them is very industry specific. And let's allow them room to succeed. We cannot give up on SOEs. We cannot.
I want to bring you in here because, you know, SAA, of course, might be smiling, and so would the Land Bank. But there are other SOEs that would have a very clear case on why they are national assets, and yet they're not being given the same kind of attention. There's the SABC that had gone to the finance minister asking for money. They didn't get that money, and yet they're told that they can't have job losses coming out of Parliament.
I think there's a big debate to be had around, firstly, the number of state-owned entities that we have and their strategic alignment to whatever framework aspirationally as a country we have. So, for instance, we've got close on around 700 of state-owned entities across different tiers of government. And if you take South African Airways as an entity, and I agree with what Nthabiseng is suggesting, that the governance failures of the last 2 decades at SAA can't be seen as the sum total of how we engage with SAA, because it continues to have very strategic parts to it that are critical not just to our national fortunes as an economy, but also to the functioning of the aviation sector. I mean, SAA Technical is an example of that. In the main, doing a significant amount of the repair and maintenance work that is being undertaken across the entire aviation sector in South Africa. And so maybe the debate, Cathy, has to be about saying, how do we get the income statement of SAA on a right footing? How do we get the income right? What kind of routes do we need? What kind of code sharing does SAA need to have with other airlines so that we're able to generate revenue for the entity and do so in a manner that has a cost base that is commensurate with the kind of entity that's going to emerge here?
All of those things are things that have been touched on before. You know, the one thing that has come out, especially with the restructuring of SAA and the business rescue process, are the different plans that had been put on the table by the likes of your Vuyani Jahanas, etc. Now, the moral case in the situation that the country is in right now, let's look at where the minister is finding money to fund SAA. Is the moral case justifiable?
So I think, Cathy, there's a functional difference with where we are now, with historically where we might have been. SAA went into voluntary business rescue towards the end of last year. Now, that already precipitates a sequence of events that gets you much closer to a liquidation than probably what some of us might like. So there's a foundational change that is different to what we've tried in the past there. But there's also a recognition that the new SAA that's going to emerge out of this is not going to be the same SAA that we've had in the last few years, be it from a headcount perspective, be it in terms of the routes that it has, even in terms of the fleet that it carries on its book. And I think the reality of where we are in the moment is that the 10.5 billion rand we're talking about here is really for some of the restructuring costs. It's to pay the business rescue practitioners, pay severance packages, and really clear the way from a capital structure perspective for the emergence of a new entity that won't be 100% government-owned, will have some strategic equity partnership, but in the main will probably be an entirely new corporate entity to what SAA was before. And the reason for that, I think, is to deal with some of the issues that you're saying, where a lot of these bailouts have crowded out much-needed social and economic spending. I mean, we've taken nearly around 7 billion here, reprioritized those funds from other programs to be able to get to this 10.5 billion rand that is being extended to SAA.
We'll continue our conversation after this quick break. Joining me in studio, Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko, who is with Stellenbosch University's Business School and economic contributor here at Newzroom Afrika, Ayabonga Cawe.